Hello again, everyone. Thanks again to all of you for having taken part in our Peace Talks webinar series recently, and welcome to those who are joining us for the first time. The theme for today's webinar is the role of parliamentarians in addressing the coronavirus crisis. Today's important program will feature 8 expert distinguished parliamentarians from all over the world. Each speaker will have 5 minutes to address the overall topic, in order to allow time for question and answer sessions at the end. Once the speakers have made their statements, we will introduce questions from the audience, and translation will be offered in English, French, Korean, and Russian. Please remember to submit your questions by email to peacetalks@upf.org and include your name and position. Today's webinar is being recorded, and the link will be available on our webpage at upf.org/peacetalks and on UPF's Facebook account later today. To introduce the program and to moderate the panelists, I call upon Dr. Thomas Walsh, Chairman of UPF International. Dr. Walsh?
Thank you, Jeannie, and thank you everyone for joining today's Peace Talks webinar. UPF's very proud to host this series, and we've been very, very encouraged by the very positive response. This is the third in the series of Peace Talks webinars. We had one that featured faith-based organizations and religious leaders, a second one that focused on governance of states, heads of state, heads of government, and today we are focused on the role of parliamentarians in addressing the coronavirus, and we could say pandemics in general as we look into the future. As much as we want to review some of what has transpired over recent weeks and months, we are also, through this webinar, looking at the future. How can we improve effectiveness and responsiveness through parliaments and through the work of parliamentarians? How can we exercise better preparedness? And what best practices might be implemented or recommended. So we have invited a very strong group of panelists today from across the world, and I think we will all benefit from and find this very stimulating. Each panelist will take 5 minutes to make their main statement, and we will leave time at the end for panelists to respond to your questions emailed to peacetalks@upf.org. Feel free to use the chat column to make responsible, constructive comments. And without further ado, we'll move straight away. I'm happy to introduce the Honorable Dan Burton, a former member of the House of Representatives of the United States of America, and the international co-chair of the International Association of Parliamentarians for Peace, a project of UPS. Congressman Burton.
Well, thank you, Dr. Walsh. It sure is great to talk to people from around the world, parliamentarians who are concerned about their countries and the people they represent. And right now, I think they're concerned about the health of everybody, in particular because of the coronavirus epidemic that we face. So I want to thank Dr. Walsh and Dr. Jenkins and everybody for putting this together today. I think it's extremely important. The reason that I'm happy we're together is because there has been no central organization that really has been working to communicate to everybody simultaneously the problems that we face with a virus of this type. We're no longer in a situation in this world where one country may have a problem and it doesn't drift into another country. Because of the global situation that we're in, because of the new technologies, everybody faces the same problems very quickly if a virus like this gets out of hand. So what we have been talking about is putting together some kind of a resolution or organization that can communicate to the rest of the world very quickly, if a virus or an epidemic like this looks like it's going to start. And the coronavirus is the first one that we're talking about. Maybe others in the future. We've had, I think, in the past 10 years, maybe 3 or 4 different viruses that have started. This one here is the one that's gotten out of hand to the degree that it has. So the whole purpose of this is to put our minds together, all of us, parliamentarians from around the world, on how to put together a resolution that we can get passed, if possible, through parliaments around the world, be introduced and passed into a law, if you speak, so that members of that parliament will know that they have the ability very quickly to get this message out to the International Association of Parliamentarians for Peace, and the rest of the world will know before it gets out of hand what the situation is. I'm anxious today to hear from all of you, and I'm sure Dr. Walsh and Dr. Jenkins are as well, all of us, Dr. DeVenecia, we're all concerned about what your views are. We've heard from some parliaments in the past that it may be difficult for them to get the message out. And if that's the case, we want to try to figure out a way to get members of the parliament, if not the whole parliament, on board to get that message as quickly as possible to the rest of the world. If we do that, and of course we've had a problem with that with the coronavirus, and as a result, thousands of people have died, hundreds of thousands of people have been infected, and it has disrupted economies around the world. Here in the United States, we've had a very big disruption. I'm sure other countries are facing the kinds of economic destructions as well. So it's very important that we all get on board, try to get a resolution drawn up, and Dr. Jenkins is going to be mentioning what we've done so far. Try to draft a resolution that we could present to parliaments in every part of the world. Hopefully that members of parliament can get that introduced into their legislative branches, that it will be passed into law in their countries, and then there'll be a mechanism for that parliament to get the message out to the International Association of Parliamentarians as quickly as possible, so we can head off another pandemic like we face right now. I believe this could be a great step in the right direction to make sure we don't have another horrible pandemic like this in the future. We may have viruses start in other countries, but if we all work together, we can head that off so it doesn't get out of the country into other countries and cause a worldwide epidemic. We now know, because of the quick way we could travel around the world through airplanes, through railway systems and everything, that something like this can spread very, very quickly. So I hope all of you, and I'm going to cut this off so we can get the questions earlier, I hope all of you around the world will figure out ways that you think this could be introduced into your parliaments. If you think of additional ways that our resolution can be expanded to do a better job, we really will appreciate that as well. But collectively, together, I think we can really head these sorts of things off and make the world a safer place, a healthier place in the future. And with that, Dr. Walsh, I'll cede the rest of my time to you.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Congressman Burton. Very good beginning to this series of panelists. I'd now like to invite Dr. Michael Jenkins. He's president of the Universal Peace Federation International, also chairman of UPF in the United States of America, working closely with Congressman Burton and with Speaker Jose DeVenecia to develop IAPP. Dr. Jenkins, you have the floor.
Thank you, Dr. Walsh, and good day to everyone throughout the world. The International Association of Parliamentarians for Peace was founded in February of 2016, has grown to have over 5,000 members of parliament that are affiliated, and we have come together across all continents, and it's developing a very significant influence. Speaker Jose DeVenecia and Congressman Dan Burton are our co-chairmen. We thank them for their leadership, and they have been asking that we would take an action step now. And that action step would be to further the cooperation among the parliaments. Our chairman, Dr. Walsh, has asked me to work directly with the IAPP in support of the co-chairman and help them to really establish that interparliamentarian relationships, and we need your help to do that. We will be convening IAPP webinars and discussion groups for every continent, continent by continent, with Congressman Burton and Speaker DeVenecia, together with Dr. Walsh and myself, to get even closer to the members of Parliament that are working in those various nations. We have representatives from almost every nation in the world, and so it's most significant. Congressman Burton has also felt that this can greatly complement the connection of the nations of the world, as leaders of the parliaments of the world are elected by the people. And because they're elected by the people, they have the voice of the people in their hearts, and they also are a little more free to be able to speak their own views and how they see a better world coming about. So we will look forward to meeting you on those webinars and Zoom calls, continent by continent. Our IAPP co-chairs are there throughout every continent and in many of the nations, and we are looking to work with them very carefully to develop this strong relationship with our co-chairs. One action step that Speaker DeVenecia and Congressman Burton have called for is what Congressman Burton just mentioned just now, and that is a special resolution that we'd like to see as many nations as possible co-sponsor a resolution or pass a resolution that will call for more cooperation to Parliament in this time of the pandemic. And what it specifically is calling for is that there would be a pandemic or a kind of a special communication system, almost like a early alert system, that if there's any information in any parliament of the world where we know that the virus is starting to manifest again or a new virus is breaking out, that will immediately be linked to every parliament. As the parliaments oversee their medical organizations and institutes, and they oversee so many aspects of the health system of their country under their heads of state and ministers. We believe that this communication will be extremely valuable, and it can help prevent a slow response. And therefore, the resolution calls for that interparliamentarian communication system that would be facilitated by IAPP. It also calls for a resource or a needs assessment for every nation, as even many nations are facing a very big threat from the virus now. Some nations are over the first period of threat, but many nations have great needs for health professionals, for ventilators, for PPE, the personal protective equipment. We'd like to do a needs assessment through the IAPP network so that we can bring that to the nations of the world, also in the parliaments of the world, and those nations who have a surplus of those kind of those medical equipment, that kind of medical equipment and other things, will be able to help send that to the nations of the world that need them the most. And then we are just also calling for ongoing cooperation of all the parliaments of the world through the parliamentarians. Your voice is very, very powerful, and I've seen it from Speaker DeVenecia and Congressman Burton, who have both been outstanding leaders on the global stage as members of their own Congress and Parliament. So I want to thank you, Dr. Walsh, for the other panelists.
Thank you, Dr. Jenkins. Very well put. I'm now honored to invite from the Philippines, the 5-time Speaker of the House of Representatives of the Parliament of the Philippines, the Honorable Jose DeVenecia Jr.
Well, it's 10:10 in the evening in Manila, and I would like to thank and congratulate the Universal Peace Federation under the leadership of Dr. Thomas Walsh and my colleague in the U.S., former U.S. Congress, Dan Burton, and our other friends for convening this informal caucus of friends across the various continents to see how we can all in combating this deadly coronavirus, which has started in China, but rapidly moved towards Africa, towards Europe, towards North America, South America, and of course, we here in Asia and the Far East. And I'm very happy that UPF has taken initiative to bring together various participants from all over the world to contribute whatever we can by way of advice or counsel or concrete initiatives to pull our efforts, our whatever wisdom we can mobilize to see how we can contribute to combat this epidemic, because we don't know how long this will continue, how long it will exist and threaten our planet. And my problem now, I'm already 83 years old. I still haven't seen any real diminution in the extent of this pandemic that is pillaging the world and the global community. Thank you, Dr. Walsh, and my colleagues in the UPF and my fellow parliamentarians for initiating this gathering today, no matter how small, but I hope we can share it, our experiences, our recommendations, and whatever initiatives we can mobilize to other parliamentarians and other organizations all over the world.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'm very happy at 83 you look strong and handsome as ever and as articulate. Thank you very much indeed. IAPP International Co-Chair. Our next speaker I'm happy to introduce is His Excellency Albin Kurti. He's the fourth Prime Minister of Kosovo, a great friend of UPF. Prime Minister Kurti, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Dr. Walsh. Dear panelists, dear participants, dear friends, we are living in difficult and uncertain times, a pandemic which we still don't have a cure, nor do we know how it originated. Over 33 million people infected worldwide, economies are nosediving and societies have paused. We don't know when a vaccine will be ready, and we don't know how the new normal will be. But in all these uncertainties, the good news is that our planet is healing. A reminder that humankind can and should do more to protect and preserve the environment for current and for future generations. We are also confronted and affected by COVID-19. So far, we have had in Kosovo around 800 recorded cases with infection, where about 270 citizens have been cured and a total of 22 have died. Due to our poor healthcare system, we took early preventive measures, which have resulted in low number of cases compared to other European countries. We've put restrictions before we had recorded cases, and we constantly reviewed our measures as the situation developed. Due to our latest measures and citizens' cooperation, in the last 2 weeks, we were able to lower the average daily increase on new infections from 27% down to 3% only. And for the last 3 days, people who are curing from COVID-19 outnumber those of who were infected. This allows us to start lifting some restrictions and open the economy gradually while carefully observing the infections curve. We know that when COVID-19 was declared a pandemic by World Health Organization, Many governments and parliaments around the world put their differences aside and focused on actions that could and would save people's lives. Unfortunately, this wasn't the case with our country. Our government, which by any measure was performing very well, was overthrown through a motion of no confidence amid the pandemic. The reasons weren't related to the management of the pandemic, nor to the performance of the government overall, but to narrow interests of some politicians who have power agendas. But in spite of this, our party, our movement, which won last elections, has the highest poll rating ever in after-war Kosovo, and likewise the caretaker government. We are now a caretaker government, and I am acting prime minister, who is taking care of the health of our citizens and at the same time preserving and protecting our democracy. In the coming weeks, we will further lift restrictions based on the epidemiological situation. Our health institutions and epidemiologists are constantly monitoring and assessing the situation, so our decisions are based on their assessment and recommendations. These are the times when, in one hand, coronavirus is not discriminating us, therefore we should not discriminate each other and should get united together in combating its expansion as a pandemic. And on the other hand, we as politicians and institutions should add more of science to our democracy. So now we live at times when we have democracy plus science, not only democracy, with sometimes science actually prevailing. That's why we are listening carefully to the science and experts, both on health and economy, and are trying to make the best decisions. On the economy side, we in Kosovo have already delivered an emergency financial package of 190 million euros to businesses and citizens who are most affected to provide short-term relief. And now we will roll out an economic recovery plan, which will be wider in scope and more extensive in time. In this regard, I want to thank European Union, United States, and our diaspora for their financial aid to help us confront COVID-19 and ease the socioeconomic situation caused by these unprecedented circumstances. As the Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Antonio Guterres, has well put it, the COVID-19 pandemic is a public health emergency, but it is far more. It is an economic crisis, a social crisis, and a human crisis that is fast becoming a human rights crisis. We should therefore act together and united, because this virus knows no borders, no colors, and no ethnicities. It affects rich and poor alike, but it is damaging the poorest more. That's why wherever we are, all of the time, we should communicate and cooperate and act together so we get out as soon as possible and with the lowest amount of consequences out of this multidimensional crisis. Thank you very much, Dr. Walsh, for the opportunity.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Prime Minister. We're honored you're with us, and thank you for joining us from Pristina. I assume you're in Pristina, and that beautiful city. Our next speaker is Honorable Maria Fernanda Flores de Alemán from Nicaragua's Parliament. She is also the former First Lady of Nicaragua. Honorable Maria Fernanda Flores de Alemán, you have the floor.
Good morning and good evening to all of you. It's very important that we are gathered today here and really putting aside everything else but to concentrate on finding solutions or proposing initiatives that could help the different nations of the world deal with this pandemic. I want to congratulate this initiative. It's in moments like this that we all need to come together, put aside all the difference that we might have, and together work in finding solutions. This is important to Nicaragua because it has a great impact on us due to the fact that the government itself has done nothing about it. And if one lesson that we have to learn from all of this is that when it comes to health, to surviving, there's no difference between us. There's no difference in colors. There's no difference in race, politics, social, nor economic differences. There's no price when it comes that you can pay when it comes to deal with the health of the human beings. Yesterday, the president of Nicaragua, on a live broadcast meeting that all of us saw, we were expecting to hear or to see a president really taking his responsibility seriously and addressing this pandemic. But it was not like that. Unfortunately, we heard nothing but the same speech that he talks all the time against the United States, against the wealthy people of Nicaragua, helping and supporting his best friend Maduro from Venezuela, the same things that the retrograde that doesn't help or doesn't solve the crisis that we're living. So that's why initiatives like this are very important, especially to poor countries. Nicaragua is the second poorest country in Latin America. And we have a population of 6.4 million of Nicaraguans. 76% of them are under the age of 40. So maybe that's a good thing because the pandemic affects more the elderly and the very young. But it's so poor that our national product, it's under 3.8% after the crisis, the political crisis that we lived in 2018. The general budget for the Republic this year, it's over 80,000 millions of Cordobas, which is about 2,350 millions of dollars for a nation of 6.4 million of people. We have, as a parliamentarian, a very important responsibility to deal with this, to help our people survive this pandemic. My party, my party in the assembly is an opposition party, and we've presented 2 bills to try to alleviate the process of the pandemic. So, like we heard before, this is not only a health problem, but it's also an economic problem. And when you live in a poor country, when you have people that depend on what they earn daily to survive, and you ask them to stay home and you ask them to isolate themselves, it's hard to understand how are they going to survive, especially when the basic needs don't stop. You still have to feed your family, you still have to pay electricity, you have to pay water, you have to buy food for your family. That doesn't stop. You don't isolate that. That continues day to day. So it's very hard for poor countries to deal with this and to explain the importance to the people, the importance of staying home, of isolating yourself, especially for at least a month or 2 months to see how it develops, how the pandemic develops. Today we have 4 officially deceased from the pandemic in Nicaragua, but we really don't know. We really don't know because we don't have official information, but what the government wants to sell or wants to tell the world that it's the situation of Nicaragua. So that makes it very hard for us. But as parliamentarians, not only did we present 2 bills where we included different methods to alleviate the economic crisis that the Nicaraguan families are going through, but we also created a bill, a law, where we presented ways to find funds to deal with this pandemic. And from the national budget, we have to mention that in the general budget of the Republic 2020, the average price of the barrel of oil was estimated at $72 a barrel. And today we know that it's not the case. It has gone down, it has dropped dramatically. So there's a difference there in money-wise, budget-wise, that could be designated to the pandemic, could be designated to provide the health workers the essentials needed to deal with this and to not to put their lives in risk. But unfortunately, we have no answer from the government. We do not expect the government to assume any responsible reaction to this pandemic. That's why initiatives like this are very important to us, because our people need to hear a voice, hear a voice of hope, hear a voice of action, of real actions that really concerns, and that they are really concerned about the survivings of their lives. And I thank the Universal Peace Federation. I thank all of you for involving us in this, because if we don't get an answer from our leaders, we need to assume that leadership, and we need to come forward in helping our people survive this pandemic. Nicaragua, it's a nation of survivors. Nicaragua has gone through many different things in our history. And even though the government has not taken any prevention measurements, the families on their own have assumed that responsibility and are staying home, are covering their faces. We see that the public schools are still open. People are working, the state is working normally. They're still calling for manifestations and public massive reunions from part of the government. But the Nicaraguans family, those that have consciously taken their lives and as their own responsibility, are not doing that. So I appreciate being part of this. And like I said before, you can count on my position as a parliamentarian, that my voice will be heard, and I will pronounce myself and constantly fight for the benefits of the people of Nicaragua. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed for bringing your message from Nicaragua. Our next speaker is from Korea. I think it's nearly midnight there. Is the Honorable Jong-sung Lim. He's the co-chair of IAPP for Korea and a member of the National Assembly of the Republic of Korea. Congressman Lim, you have the floor. Good evening.
네, 안녕하세요. 대한민국 국회의원 임동석입니다. 신종 코로나 바이러스가 국내에 유입된 지 100일이 지났습니다.
100 days have passed since the new coronavirus was introduced into Korea. Our Republic of Korea has been classified as dangerous country as the number of confirmed cases per day increased to about 900 people after massive infection. But now, as the number of new confirmed patients decreased by 1 digit per day, Korea's quarantine system, K-Defense, is drawing attention from all over the world. Overall, Korea's quarantine model gives a lot of implications that achieve the quarantine performance without violating the basic right of the people. I think the lessons learned from the experience of the Seoul ferry disaster 2014 and the 2015 MERS incident in the background of effectively responding to Corona-19. At the time, the government were packed, and immature initial response resulted in many people's sacrifice and illness. The current government has been using this past experience as a lesson and has tried to build a social safety net against disaster under the principles of openness, transparency, and democracy. In particular, after the MERS incident, the government upgraded the head of the Center for Disease Control and Prevention to vice level, and they co-organized organizations such as Emergency Center, Infectious Disease Analysis Center to monitor and respond to the infectious disease at home and abroad. That's why we were able to respond quickly, transparently, in the event of the Corona-19 incident. Commercialization of advanced screening clinics and then diagnostic kits has also led to the rapid prevention. First, in order to effect patients early, selection clinic was operated nationwide, so the suspected cases of infection could be treated separately before entering the medical institution. Among them, new inspection systems such as drive-through and walk-through were introduced to minimize face-to-face contact. The inspection time it took more than 30 minutes, also greatly reduced by about 10 minutes. In addition, we will maximize our diagnostic testing capabilities to over 600,000 tests over 100 days. This large-scale inspection was possible because quarantine authorities and domestic companies actually began developing diagnostic kits from the beginning of the Corona-19 incident. From the time when there were no confirmed persons in Korea, the private sector began to develop diagnostic reasons. To support this, the government implemented the emergency use approval system in full force and complete the approval process and took about a year and a half in just 1 week. In addition, police judgments such as management and the supervision of foreign immigrants, epidemiological investigations, transparent information disclosure, system prevention, government support to corona procedure examination, and treatment and supply of public masks by day were also important. Above all, the real protagonist was who quickly with the coronavirus threat are healthcare workers and the public. This was possible because there were citizens who participated in the discomfort of needs, wearing masks, leaving social distance. A healthcare provider dedicated to diagnostic treatment of patients despite the risk of infection. Moreover, several voluntary movements such as the Good Landlord movement, the Good Prepared movement, and charity thanks to thank the healthcare practitioner for land deduction for the people with difficulties in their livelihood can overcome the national crisis together. It became powerful. And the 29th National Assembly passed a supplementary plan to pay emergency disaster relief fund to all the people, and they work together to reduce the suffering of the people. The Republic of Korea is now preparing for a daily transition while fighting the remaining Corona-19 virus. Just as many countries have been interested in Korea's quarantine, the government and the people work together so that the successful coexistence of quarantine and daily life can be an example. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Lim, also joining us very late at night. And we all have learned a lot from Korea's response. And I know UPF has been working with various Korean agencies to be very helpful as much as possible. So thank you for leading IAPP and for your service to the National Assembly in Korea. We now turn to our next speaker, who I'm very happy to introduce. She is Baroness Sandeep Verma from the House of Lords in the UK. Baroness Verma, you now have the floor. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Dr. Walsh, and thank you to UPF for organising this really important panel discussion today, and to my fellow panelists for their wonderful insight into what they have brought to the discussion so far. And I would also like to thank the hundreds of participants that have joined us on this discussion from across the world. It is such a critical debate to be had, and I'd like to turn my attention to maybe 2 or 3 key points that I feel we need to explore further as parliamentarians, as thought leaders, as business leaders, as those people that are on the ground, that are community effectors, those people that can help communities respond. And I think, first of all, we should learn from the lessons of Zika and Ebola, where countries have had to really face challenging diseases that has spread very rapidly, but amongst very poor health institutions and poor medication that was available at the time. And I think just by learning from those countries, we can actually start to work out why it is so important that the global parliamentarians come together to discuss how we best share practices, how we're able to look at how we strengthen each other's institutions, whether they are governance institutions, whether they're political, whether they're economical, or whether they are educational and health institutions. Because unless we learn the lessons that this is an opportunity against a really horrible backdrop of this pandemic, that we can reset the balance of how we look at each other across the globe, so that it isn't that the North constantly, because of its wealthier economies, can actually access things better and quicker and easier, and those in the poor South countries are there struggling and continue to struggle against a backdrop of numerous other challenges. And we know those challenges are already there, whether it's natural disasters on weather, or whether it's natural disasters on famine, dry land, and shortage of water. So I think we have a duty to come together, and I think this resolution that's been put today and this agreement that comes across from all parliamentarians and all others that can influence the way parliaments work across the globe is really critical. I'm worried. I still remain incredibly worried that this pandemic's longer lasting effect will have a much more negative impact on women and girls across the globe. And I fear that the one thing that we're beginning to see now is that when people are not able to access the right medical facilities and the right medical equipment, that often as not, it is those women and girls that still remain left behind and out of the sort of wider agenda of debate. So I think it's really critical for all of us to be able to understand that we have an opportunity. We need to take that opportunity up. I mean, all economies are going to face huge dips in their ability to grow. We've seen it across the big nations. America is demonstrating millions are now unemployed. We've seen it in my own country here in UK, where admittedly the Chancellor has put into place enormous measures to try and help businesses. But to get a country back on its feet after such a critically long time in lockdown is going to take huge efforts from all of us. So I think I want to congratulate you all on bringing this to the table. I don't want it to be something that is quickly forgotten just shortly after we all start to recover, because unfortunately with many of these things, once you start feeling better, you start forgetting that others are still suffering. And I think we need to see our opportunity to look at how we better come as a family of nations together, and how we are critical of those countries that refuse to play ball, and those countries that are secretive in how they respond, and those countries that actually are demonstrating that even amongst their poverty, they've taken on huge challenges with refugees on their lands and still managing to try in the context of their country economy, trying to ensure that everybody is trying to be kept safe. So Dr. Walsh, there is so much you can say on this topic, but I think I will close there. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Baroness Verma. And I applaud all the panelists for their being concise and disciplined. We had two panelists we had been hoping to hear from, Honorable Kalita from the BJP party, the Parliament of India governing party, and we also had hoped to have Senator Korbani Solomon Teko from the Kingdom of Lesotho, but technical difficulties have somehow prevented that. We regret that, but we wanted very much to have Africa represented as well as India. Without further ado, I'd like us to shift to the Q&A, and I'm going to ask Dr. Bill Selig to, he's been fielding questions that have been emailed to peacetalks@upf.org, as well as reviewing some of the chat. I think also you as panelists have seen the chat. I think we will move to gallery mode so the audience will see all the panelists at this juncture. And Dr. Selig, if you would begin the question. I ask the panelists to answer as needed, and also keep those remarks brief so that we can get to as many questions as possible. We have nearly 500 participants and a lot of chat that's saying how much they're appreciating what's been said thus far. Dr. Selig, are you there?
Dr. Walsh and distinguished panelists, this first question is for the Baroness. It's from Dr. Sheikh Ramzi from UK. He says, "Bless you, Baroness. I'm concerned about the old people in care homes. What can be done to protect them at home and other places?"
Thank you, Dr. Selig, and thank you for the question. As you know, there has been a huge issue in the UK around deaths occurring in care homes, and I am a provider of social care myself, and one of my businesses is in adult social care. And I can tell you the worry that we have, for not just for our staff, but for the families we visit. And it is something now the government has begun to recognize, but I fear it is a recognition quite late in the day. And I hope that countries across the world start to see that unless we put social care and healthcare absolutely hand in hand, these sort of horrible outcomes that are happening now in the UK will be prevalent across the world. And they are hard lessons to learn. And I'm really fearful. I hope very much that going forward, that all people and all care staff in care homes and in the domiciliary sector are given the proper PPE to equip themselves. But I do think funding, proper recognition of the skills that are required is necessary.
Thank you, Baroness. The next question is for Honorable Dan Burton from Robert Kittle. He's saying, "This time it seems the post-pandemic scenario will also require parliamentarians to play a key role in mitigating political, economic, and social hearing. What are some possible roles lawmakers can play in this situation? For example, addressing the polarization between China and the United States vis-a-vis discovering the origins of the virus?"
Well, I think that's a very good question. I'm not sure that the problems that exist between China and the United States or possibly other countries is going to be solved by what we're talking about today. I think it's great that we're considering that question. The main thing that I think needs to be done, and I hope that the goal of our meeting today with UPF and IAPP is that we make sure that that parliaments around the world are made aware of what they can do to help solve the problem. Resolutions like the one we're talking about creating, if we could get those passed by parliaments around the world, then all of the parliamentarians in those organizations will be aware of it, and they can be conduits for getting information out as quickly as possible. One of the questions that was asked before we had the meeting was, what do we do if a government doesn't respond? Well, if a parliament in its entirety is not going to be able to respond, then individual parliamentarians who are members of IAPPF or UPF, if they could still make us aware, they could be an individual to get the message out to us as quickly as possible, and then we can react to it. Obviously, it would be better if the entire parliament were to notify us. But if that isn't possible, because this is such a horrible problem we're facing, a pandemic of this type, it's extremely important that an individual parliamentarian, and we have over 5,000, would contact UPF and IAPP as quickly as possible. And then we would be made aware of it, and we'll get the message out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Question.
The next question is for Honorable Lim in Korea. This is from Mr. Raja Mohan in Singapore. The question is, I would like to congratulate South Korea on their successful implementation of the spreading of the virus. My question for Korea, are you all prepared for the second wave of the COVID-19 if it happens? What advice can you give to other nations?
지금 코로나19 사태는
Corona situation, we see this, we are successful to somehow quarantine in Korea, but still potentially the virus is still remain and existed all over the people. Practically, this effect, and then all we can see that all over the situation. That kind of the medicine or vaccine, all those things on the way to develop. This is still we are ongoing on the way this development or medicine. So in order to we are wisely to overcome all this situation, we are globally we are cooperate each other to find out some solution and the wisdom. That is a key. We can prevent the second wave of the coronavirus. So we are work together. That's the key point we learned from in Korea. That's how I will mention this idea. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Lim.
Thank you. The next question is for Dr. Jenkins. Dr. Jenkins, this is from Tony Eke, Peace Ambassador. Thank you, Dr. Jenkins, and all the panelists for this wonderful webinar. My question, you mentioned the importance of need assessment, which is ideal. What plans or resources are currently put in place? And most importantly, what form of metrics will be utilized to determine which parts of the world that needs help the most as a result of the current pandemic?
That's a very good question, and I think that IAPP can play a very crucial role. That's why we would like to ask all the IAPP co-chairmen to help us set up that network for a needs assessment. The metrics of that assessment are being finalized today, and we'll get that out to you. And then how we will get the resources to each nation will take a tremendous effort of cooperation. And we need your thoughts on how to really evaluate where the greatest need is. Of course, there are many countries throughout the world that don't have the health system that can really respond to a very tremendous crisis of the pandemic. That's why I think this global cooperation is so important. Last week's UPF Peace Talks, Prime Minister Harper of Canada also shared that same concern. The global cooperation is more critical now than ever, and we should work together as partners with interparliamentarian organizations. We should work with the United Nations. We should work together parliament to parliament to make sure we get a balanced and fair assessment, and then also get those resources out to people. I know that I heard just yesterday from the US government is sending ventilators to Nigeria now. So I think there's tremendous resources throughout the world in nations who are now going over the hill with this. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jenkins.
Thank you. The next question is for Speaker de Venecia. It's from Dupuy Emmanuel. The United Nations will celebrate next October its 75th birthday. The UN has launched a reflection on how to regenerate the UN and multilateralism. The pandemic could thus trigger a new perspective on poly-governance based on the merge of non-state actors. The question, how could parliamentarians play their part in that perspective?
Mr. Speaker, could you hear the question?
The last part I did not hear.
It's from Emmanuel Dupuy in Paris, I believe, asking about multilateralism in this context and poly-governance, which includes not only governments, but also civil society organizations to address pandemics, is what I understood.
Yes, concretely from our standpoint, this is a very real crisis that is plaguing almost all nations of the world. I think that if we can all recommend that, say, 1% or 1.5% of the budgets of our respective republics, parliaments, governments, etc., can be allocated and released, say, over 3 or 4 installments because I do not know how long this crisis will run, so that we can address this problem adequately, scientifically, and correctly, and make sure that monies and resources are available, and that health ministries in every country can implement such appropriation, so that it will, the provinces, the cities, the townships, the villages, which are all plagued now, or mostly plagued now, by this coronavirus. So if we can come out through this initiative of UPF, Dr. Walsh, and make a specific, concrete recommendation of a specific small budget from each country, but simultaneously approved and distributed all over the world, I think our conference tonight would have resulted in something very specific, very concrete, and action-oriented as well.
Thank you, Honorable Devenicia. I think we have time for one more question.
Yes, the final question for Mr. Curtin from Kosovo, from Mr. Paul Malay. He's asking, my question is about asking for comment on taking a more strategic view of this crisis, in that view of the three main dangers facing this generation: pandemics, climate, and conflict, which we see are intricately entangled. The pandemic may temporarily clean the environment and perhaps less, and the staggering debt. The world is changing socially and materially. Are we seriously considering the big picture?
Yes, thank you for the question. I'm just reiterating that we should use this pandemic expansion on one hand to see how we live together in one and same world. So we must have collective actions for our collective problems. Relying only on our particular circumstances is simply not enough, number one. And just like pandemic COVID-19 showed this, also I believe climate change has been showing this. Therefore, I think more cooperation is needed, and the pandemic COVID-19 should make us think more in that direction. So just like Universal Peace Federation is doing, we need more and more activities and forums and cooperations which are organized worldwide in order to bring us together, so we think more of each other and of all of us. Of course, I'm not saying that climate change is going now to get softened by the fact that we travel less and that even the air, for example, in the capital town of Kosovo, in Pristina, is now cleaner. It's not the solution not to travel, not to have transports, but we really should think harder about things we share, namely the space and air and water. Since we keep this minimum 2-meter distance and we share the space, we breathe the same air. And I think that what is in common among us should come at forefront. And paradoxically, the pandemic COVID-19 was one of the means to force us to think more and better in this direction.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. That'll conclude our Q&A session. I'm sorry we ran out of time and we couldn't hear from every question, but we appreciate the participation of an audience of nearly 500 from around the world. For all of you as excellent panelists, I think particularly our international co-chairs, Honorable Dan Burton and Speaker Jose de Venecia. As Dr. Jenkins mentioned, we will begin developing a series of IAPP webinars in addition to the primary Peace Talks weekly webinars. I can only say thank you from the bottom of my heart with sincerity for participating, especially some of you are staying up till midnight in Asia, and but so glad, and I'm happy to hear the chats and see what people are writing, which is also very significant and important. Thank you. We'll sign off for now. Mrs. Kagawa, do you have any final announcement?
The only thing I have to add to Dr. Walsh's wonderful comments about this very important discussion is that the next webinar, the next Peace Talks webinar will be on May 8th, and we will be sending you further information concerning the topic. So we hope to see you then.
Thank you all very much.